Theodosia and the Serpents of Chaos by R.L. LaFevers. And this is chapter 12, following, oops, following the leader. It was much easier following Tetley. He'd never met me before and had no idea who I was, so it didn't really matter if he spotted me. I strolled along behind him as he made his way down Great Russell Street, then turned left on Bloomsbury. We walked along that street for a couple of blocks until we came to Oxford Street, which presented a bit of a problem. First of all, it's a very busy road, and getting across it without being plowed into by a hansom, growler, or omnibus, or worse yet, one of those new motor buses, required quick thinking and even quicker feet. Second, Oxford Street was my boundary, the street past which I was not allowed to go without my parents, ever. I would like to say my conscience caused me to at least pause before I stepped into the street and dashed across, but that would be lying. I valiantly forged ahead, visions of mothers' and fathers' faces alight with joy as I presented them with the lost heart of Egypt filling my head. Once we crossed Oxford Street, Tetley led me through a maze of dark streets and winding alleys that housed pubs, pie and chip shops, lodging houses, and pawnbrokers. The houses grew shabbier, the air thicker and danker with the black smoke and fog that hung above London like a nasty ghost. Forgotten laundry hung from the windows, now sodden with rain. Small bodies crouched in doorways and looked out at me with large, bleak eyes. Few of them had coats, most huddled in old shawls that were little more than rags. I wish I had some pocket money on me so I could have shared it with them. Quite frankly, I was beginning to feel a little nervous. I'm sure this is why I've been told not to cross Oxford Street. I glanced ahead at Tetley and drew a little closer. He paused for a moment to consult his watch and then looked up and down the street. I bent over to fiddle with the button on my shoe. That's when I heard the sound of footsteps behind me come to a sudden stop. A small, greasy fear clutched my stomach. I forced myself to stand up and casually glanced over my shoulder. I saw no one. Well, no one who looked as if they were following me. But then they wouldn't look as if they were following me because they would be trying to hide it, now wouldn't they? But wait. There was a set of rather nice clothes back there being worn by a boy just a tad smaller than me. He had a cowlick like a single devil's horn. "Henry!" A jolt of relief shot through me. Henry smiled, mind you, as if this were all a lark, then pulled his hands out of his pockets and trotted toward me. Tetley began walking again. My fear of losing him was greater than my desire to bean Henry for scaring me half to death, so I turned to follow. "Wait! Theo!" Henry called after me in a harsh whisper. I whirled around. "Henry! You ninny! Don't you know anything about spying? You cannot make noise like that when you're following a person." Henry caught up to me with a wide grin on his face. "But I followed you pretty good, didn't I?" "Come on, we're going to lose him." He had done a good job of following me, but I wasn't about to tell him and have it swell his already inflated head. However, I must confess to be glad of having a traveling companion on these streets. "Why are you following him?" Henry asked. I stepped into the street, careful to keep my eye on Tetley. "Well, if you don't know, then why are you following me?" He shrugged. "It was better than hanging around a moldy old museum." "Our museum isn't moldy," I corrected. We paused at a junction that connected 7 streets, each leading off like the spoke of a wheel. With a shock, I realized we were standing in the 7 Dials, one of the most notorious neighborhoods in all of London. I would be in a whole tub full of hot water if my parents ever found out. Hopefully they'd be so thrilled at getting the heart of Egypt back they'd forget all about it. Tetley stopped to look around as if he were expecting someone to meet him. Henry whispered, "So what is going on, Theo?" I wondered if I could trust him. He had risked an awful lot to follow me, and it wouldn't hurt to have someone else know what was going on, in case things went wrong. "First, You need to promise you won't tell anyone." "I promise." I quickly filled him in. When I'd finished, Henry whistled. "That is suspicious." "Exactly. I'm certain he must know something about its disappearance." "I'm sure you're right," Henry said. My chest swelled with pride. Perhaps my instincts had been right to trust him. Tetley took off again, and away we went. He turned down a side street where the houses went from shabby to downright grim. The dank, rat-infested streets were lined with listless, exhausted men and women. Dirty, hollow-eyed children huddled at their feet. Their pinched faces and dull eyes were haunting. Henry moved closer to me, and I took a deep breath to steady myself. My lungs filled with grimy London air that reeked of the Thames, which we seemed to be winding our way toward. "How long are you going to follow him?" Henry asked, uncertain. "I'm not sure. I was wondering the same thing, trying to decide how much farther I wanted to go in this part of town. But I didn't want Henry to know I was uneasy. I was the oldest, and it was my duty to present a bold front. Still, it did seem as if we were getting nowhere, at least nowhere I'd want to be. And I didn't want to get our throats slit in the process. It looks as if he's heading to the river. We'll follow him there, and if nothing has happened by then, we'll hightail it back. Only I'd choose an alternative route." Just then Tetley turned down a particularly filthy street that reeked of sewer. I nearly reached up to pinch my nose shut, but realized that might offend someone. This was not the sort of neighborhood you went around offending people in. "Breathe out of your mouth," I advised Henry. "Don't worry, I am," he answered, his voice thick. I glanced nervously into the shadows that lurked near the houses, nearly fainting in fright when one of them detached itself and began walking in our direction. "Run!" I whispered urgently.